Okay, so this is the pop-up skill, and in my opinion it's the most fundamental body movement. So we're not talking about fundamentals in terms of making a tripod and getting balance and anchoring yourselves, but in terms of physical body motions to ensure safety and correct practice, if you will, is the pop-up. Now the pop-up is basically going from a forearm position to a hand, and being able to do that, having that pop back up, because this is nice and deceptive if I'm down on the ground, and having the ability to pop up onto a hand is super effective. There are 3 levels to practice this. On the wall, there are 3 levels I would say to practice this. The first one would be on a wall. The second level would be either on both knees and one hand, or one knee and one hand. Same idea, popping up. And the third would be only on my toes, or my toe stops if I was wearing skates, and on one forearm. So what that looks like is this, being able to go up onto here and back up. This does involve a little bit of upper body strength, but really takes into that equation, really encouraging that momentum, whether with that extra arm on my forearm, throwing my arm up to help, or throwing my hips up to help, particularly in the level 3 scenario where I'm down here, is really making sure that I'm good at using momentum in my hips or in my hand to help up, back up to a standing upright position. So experimenting with the wall, one knee down, or toes being the hardest one, and just being really good at that. So, you know, practicing just repetition, you know, 5 each side, 10 each side, 50 each side, whatever it takes to get this down is, in my opinion, the most fundamental skill. So another very useful skill is the slide. So this is basically the equivalent of doing like an ab roller, the wheel that you use for training your abs, but using your wrist guards. So this can really only be done on wrist guards and on certain floors. So a concrete floor will should work fine. It can be a little difficult, but the smoother the better. Grass, I suppose, could work, but it might be a bit tricky. But essentially the slide is, if you get stuck out way out here, is being able to slide back in. It doesn't have to be some sort of textbook, you know, gym maneuver where you can do, you know, something nice and smooth. It doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as, you know, something comfortable and something that's going to work for you. It doesn't have to be 2 hands, it could be 1 hand. But practicing that slide in different scenarios to help that type of motion, etc., to practice being good at that slide, because inevitably you'll need it and it will happen. Try and use an old set of wrist guards opposed to track ones, and it's very helpful. So this is the train track drill. The purpose of this drill is to encourage correct practice on the correct line, meaning the correct hand or the correct foot. That doesn't mean you can't use the opposite one, and in some of the scenarios you might come across, you might need to use the wrong one, but what I'm illustrating is the easiest way to get back up. Stable base, correct tripod style kind of movement. So what I've set up is lines alternatively, and then one straight one at the end. You could use tape like I have, you could use, this could be on grass, and you could use sticks, you could use whatever you want, it doesn't really matter. It's essentially just making sure you're practicing the correct foot in the correct hand in the correct place. So what that looks like is making sure each line should be 1 step. So if I'm starting here at the beginning, that I'm thinking, if that's the first one I'm thinking, I need to make sure that's my right hand and my left foot. So that I'm going to go here and down to make my tripod. Then say up, down, to make my tripod, down here, to make my tripod, etc. Okay, and the straight one at the end is just whatever I feel like, so straight down and back up again. Can be whatever I want. Back to the beginning. And if you want to practice it with the incorrect one, just for fun and just to trial and test things, by all means do so. Just making sure you're practicing it as possible. Push that way. Experiment with this. Okay, so this is the apex drill, and because the majority of one-hand stuff is done on a curve opposed to a straightaway, it doesn't exclusively mean it's not done on a straightaway, but majority of stuff is done on the curve because you do have that slight bit of advantage. This represents both the inside and the outside line, so if I'm on this side, obviously that's the outside line, but on this side it's obviously the inside line. Each cone represents a point into which to do a one-hand down manoeuvre. The goal of this drill is to practice using it as a bounce to jump from one to the next, because sometimes you end up having to use consecutive one-hand down movements, one after the other, so as soon as you're up you have to use it again. So it's practicing it continuously for as many cones as there are, with a jump from one to the other in some sort of like toe stop scenario or a step to practice the next one. So what that looks like is like this. Etc. And therefore you would then repeat the opposite way if you wanted to, or on the opposite line on the other side, on this side, to represent the outside line. But it doesn't really matter, having that just a bit of experimentation process, practicing a small sort of toe stop manoeuvre from one cone to the next with a correct, legal and rules abiding one hand down manoeuvre. This is the lava drill, and as you can see I've made some sort of shape on the ground, and this is my little island. The out of bounds area is lava, and for this drill you will need assistance. So here's my lovely assistant. So basically what's going to happen is I'm going to be inside the circle, Rosie is going to be outside the circle, and if you have someone that you're social distancing with and can do contact at home, for example, then you would do sort of derby style contact hits in any way, shape or hands. You know, even if Rosie's doing something illegal, even with forearms, it doesn't really matter. It's just about practicing knocking me over and practicing this one hand down stuff at different angles. So as I'm moving around, practicing one hand down, Rosie's going to come from different angles to push me over. So that looks like this. Yeah, I'll do that. Etc. However, if you are unable to, if you have to social distance people, maybe when we get back to skating there's non-contact, then we have this useful device. So you can basically do social distance contacting, using the same idea to push me around, so I can practice my one hand down practice in any way, shape or form, using something that's safe, easy and available to practice getting up and down with. So this is the final off skates drill, and I'm calling it the creation circle. So it's the same setup as the lava circle, but instead of having a partner beating you up, it's just allowing you to experiment, but really think about using your pads. Because they are made of plastic more often than not, when you land you do have that slide. Is having an experiment with what you can do with these kinds of things. So really just bending around and moving around all over the place and just being creative with what you can come up with, whether it's practicing different pop-ups from different angles or slides from different angles, or even experimenting with what you can do with your knee pads to making sure you're still in bounds and just getting super comfy being on the floor, being on your pads and experimenting with what's possible. Just ensuring that you're always trying to only put one hand down and keeping to the rules as best as possible, but really just play with it and have fun is the only purpose of this drill.